Hey everyone, hope you're having a great evening. This is the last of our four-part series on slaughtering investments, and today we're going to talk about what is the core of our 2 to 6 year model. We have a few QR codes for you, so as always, go ahead and have your camera ready, or of course, you can pull these on the replay. So these are the replay links for the last 4 webinars. All 3 of those are now available. This one will be available on Monday next week, and you can go back and rewatch these. And again, I encourage you, if you have any questions after watching, you can submit those to us at info@slaughterinvesting.com, and we will get those answers posted back to you and on social media. I have an upcoming webinar tomorrow, and this is going over the Texoma corridor and the areas where we are investing in our real estate funds. So we have one fund in Southern Oklahoma, new construction, and then we have a renovation fund on the Texas side. This is available for accredited investors only, but if you do want to learn about this Texoma area and why we're so just excited about what's happening there, please tune in, and that is tomorrow at 2 p.m. in Central Time. We have 3 more bus tours upcoming right now. We've got 2 more this year, November 18th and December 8th. And then we have our first one of 2024, January 26th. We'll also be sending out a link for an upcoming virtual tour where we will cover some more of our markets. Our big tour and our big kind of weekend event is December 8th and 9th. So the 8th is the tour, and then the 9th is the big party at my house. It's no business. It's just, being with like-minded people, having a great time celebrating the end of the year. And so if that's something that you're interested in, please reach out. We can get you more information. So again, as always in Wealth and Rentals, our goal is to educate you, to bring events and contacts to your fingertips, offer mentorship and mastermind opportunities to help you build your investments. And of course, just consulting and generally being available for people who need guidance in their real estate investing journey. Michael and I, we've been doing this a long time. We're very passionate about what we do. And personally, my favorite thing to do is help others do what we have done and educate on how we did it. So here we are. You can join our podcast if you haven't already done that. We've got lots of content dropping every week, as well as our YouTube channel. And on YouTube is where you will find the replays of this 4-part series. I recommend following us on Facebook if you're not already doing that. Not only Slaughter Investing, but also me personally, if you're interested. We post our rehabs, a lot of market data. We also have a free Facebook group called Wealth and Rentals, and every day I'm in there posting market updates and anything that you need to know as real estate investors, not only information here in Texas, but nationwide, all sorts of different things. Like today, one of the things I posted was about the new law for 1099s and that you have to send them electronically if you do more than 10 in a year or 10 or more. And so lots of just different things to know as business owners, investors, people in real estate. And that's a free group to join called Wealth and Rentals. And then if you're not on our text list, this is the best way to stay up to date on what we are doing and what we have upcoming. And this is that number that you text join to, and it will reply back with information. And certainly we're not trying to spam you, and we're not selling your information to anybody. This is just to get you on the text list. And then finally, the email list, probably where you heard about this event today. Definitely recommend you join that if you have not already. That is where we send out all of our upcoming events and live education channel and all sorts of things that we are doing. So before I begin, as always, everything I'm going to talk about is my best guess and judgment based on doing this for a very long time and building my own portfolio, but also owning and operating a real estate firm separately. There's no crystal ball. All real estate is subject to potential loss and risk. Of course, we believe our model and what we do is the best option out there for passive investing, active investing, and just secure investing. But of course, there's lots of different ways to make money, not only in real estate, but in other avenues. And so our goal is to be one tool in your toolbox and to connect you to others who can help guide you and facilitate the creation of your real estate investment and other investment journey. So to recap the last 3, you've probably gotten real tired of hearing this, but we just want to make sure everybody understands kind of what this plan is in case you're tuning in for the first time. So the first thing that you're going to do is buy a property with max leveraging. And what that means is, dependent on where rates are and cash flow is, it's going to depend on how much you're going to leverage that property. In a typical market with moderately low interest rates, we generally see people leverage at 75 or 80%. Right now, most people are leveraging at 70 to 75%. Some are even doing 65%, so very rate dependent. Step two, and we're going to talk a little bit about this today because our whole path here is talking about what do we do once we own that property and equity has built. So, first we talked about the model as a whole. We talked about how we leverage and why we leverage. We talked about the rental ownership phase and the tenancy. And now it's okay, well, we have this property, it's gone up in value, or I have all this equity. What is the next step? And how does this model all come together to build my portfolio with the original money that I put in? And so step two really is that process of doing something with that equity, doing something with that property. And then step three is with whatever we've done in step two, the capital that we've gotten back, whether it's a cash out or whether it's a 1031 exchange, it's what are we doing with that money? Are we buying more property? And what kind of property can we buy? How many can we buy? And so step three is what comes after you've completed that 2 to 6 year model. So again, that life cycle of a property, it's pretty simple. You buy a property or properties with max leveraging, you receive monthly cash flow and all the other benefits. The property appreciates, principal pays down, of course, that's the goal, and then refinancing cash out or do a 1031 exchange. So the 2 to 6 year model is all about using your initial equity or investment, and that's to continue moving that same money forward. And so basically what that means is if you put 20% down when you buy a home, what we are looking at for this 2 to 6 year model is for that 20% to turn into more money, and that more money to be enough for you to be able to go buy more properties. And so that's really important because some of us have high paying jobs and we can keep going because we save up more cash or we have inheritance or whatever it may be, and then we can go buy more homes. But then most of the people we work with and most of our clientele, they have a set amount of money available to invest. And so that money has to be taken as far as it can get you because we don't have just, golden goose money falling in our laps all the time. And so what the model is saying is, okay, well, this X amount of money that you start with, what can I do with that? And what are the ways I can use it to build it as quickly as possible so that I can have more and more property? Because we've talked about all the different ways that properties make you money, right? You've got cash flow and the monthly payments that are coming into your bank account over above the expenses. You've got principal pay down, paying down the equity in your mortgage. You've got the tax benefits, either straight line depreciation or cost segregation. If you're a real estate professional, more benefits. And then, of course, what we have is what we hope for is appreciation. And so there's really 4 ways that real estate makes you money. And so the more of it you have, the more of those things that you're making. And so that's a class for a different day. We've taught that one. But the goal is, of course, to have as many properties as possible. And we recognize that there's X amount of money to do that. And so the model is designed to have X amount of money take you as far as it possibly can. So imagine that continuing to double every 2 to 6 years, right? So you start with one home, you 1031 exchange your cash out, 1 turns into 2, 2 into 4, 4 into 8, and this is how you wind up where I am with more properties than you can remember. And so this is the goal and this is the model of that 2 to 6 year model. So although you may have more capital to inject in the future, the entire purpose of this is to take every dollar as far as you can possibly take it. And then it's going to make you these 4 types of income, these 4 types of benefit, and continue to maximize that on an ongoing basis. And so I had a client call me a couple weeks ago, new client who has millions liquid. And so one of the conversations that I have with someone like that when I start is just because you have a lot of money doesn't change the model. It might change a little bit how much money you put down. It might change a little bit on whether you pay cash first to get, some type of benefit here and maybe refinance on the back end. So your access to money and maybe ease of transactions might be a little bit better. But the model doesn't change. Even where I am today in my career and in my real estate journey, the model is still the same. The model does not change. What changes is the way that you facilitate it. And that's just because obviously the more money you have, the easier some things become. But at the end of the day, the model works no matter where you are in your journey, where you are in your financial journey, and where your bank account is. So the process starts off with the ownership of or the acquisition of a property. And the reason why it's not just acquisition of a property is because some people already have a home that they're sitting in with a lot of equity. Sometimes it's a personal home that you really don't want to hold on to. I had someone this week who even asked me, well, maybe I should sell my personal home and move into one of my short-term rentals. And so sometimes it's a property you already have. So don't just look at what you've bought as a rental, look at everything that you have and reassess every property every year, even your homestead, because you may look at it and be like, well, that's not the best option for me, or maybe with all this equity, I can go get a nicer home. And so when we're looking at the model, we want to look at everything that you have. I had another client who has a short-term rental and they bought it down in Houston and they're not using it as a short-term rental really. but they bought it so they can go be with their kids. And so my suggestion was, well, let's get rid of that one. You're not tied to it. You're not really, attached to it. And let's go get one that actually works better as a short-term rental that you can actually make money on, instead of just having to hold this house that you got that doesn't work as a short-term rental empty. And so that way, instead of costing you thousands of dollars a month, you can actually cover your cost of that property and hopefully turn a profit and still have it available whenever you want. So again, you want to be assessing and looking at everything individually. So these properties that we're talking about, they have equity from one of three things, and sometimes it's more than one of these things. So either principal pay down and appreciation, or maybe putting too much money down up front, or maybe you purchased and rented it while you're letting it do both of those items above. And so it doesn't really matter how the equity got there at the end of the day when we run our cash on cash returns. And I'm going to kind of brief you again on that to give you a little bit of a refresher. But when we run our numbers, it is 100% about how much equity we have in that property, because that is what determines our return. And so again, it doesn't matter how that equity got there, it just matters that it's there. So let's walk through the process together on a sample property so you can understand what this process looks like. So this is a home that I have. And so, using an example of a home that I bought new. So let's say that we bought this home 2 years ago for $210,000. And I'm just using round numbers here about where market numbers were so that you can see what this process looks like, what we see every single day. So let's assume you bought it for $210,000. Let's assume you put 20% down, or $42,000 equity, keeping in mind that at this point when you buy, your down payment is your only equity. And then a loan amount of 80%, or $168,000. So the average price change this year, so this first year of ownership, was $63,000. I put the market data at the bottom. That way you know that these are actual numbers of actually what happened. But in practicality, we're using made up property here. So average price change, you gained $63,000 approximate in value average in Sherman. So conservatively, let's say this home actually went up only 17%, not the 31.4% that it actually did, most likely. And so we're really looking at about half of what the average is in this year. So that home is now worth $245,700 at the end of 2022. And you can see kind of this chart of real estate value going up. Of course, if you've been listening to me, I've already told you all the reasons why I think real estate is the safest investment. So I'm not going to hash that back out today. But I do want you to see that this type of model we're talking about, here are the numbers. This is precisely how it works. So again, at purchase, you bought it for $210,000. Your original equity was $42,000, and your loan amount was $168,000. Your new value in a year is $245,700, and again, that's cutting about in half what the actual increase in average value was in Sherman. And the new equity is now $77,700. So we went from $42,000 to almost $78,000. So in the next year, and this gets us up to last month, what we have seen is values go up another 8.5%. So assuming that the new value is about $266,584.50. Now you'll see that the average list price in Sherman is almost $315,000. So in reality, this is probably a little bit low. However, we're just going to run with it because we're trying to use an example based on average figures. And so what that means is the new value again is $266,584 and some change. So again, at purchase, we were $210,000, $42,000, $168,000. The new value is now $266,584, and the new equity is now $98,584. So remember, 2 years ago, we started with $42,000 equity, and now we have $98,584 approximate equity. So basically, we've 2.34 times our original equity in 2 years, meaning that your return has more than likely cut in half. Now, some of you may not understand why that is, so let's talk about that. Higher equity is a huge problem for returns because the amount of money that you're making on the amount of money that's in the deal changes. Now, rents may go up a little bit, expenses are going to go up a little bit most likely. So although your rent may go up, so it may take some of that kind of negative offset of having more equity in the property away, you're still going to lose return. So all this is to say that continuing to monitor your returns and your personal scenario is paramount to your success. In our wealth and rentals events, this is one of the things that I hammer home hard. So many people are sitting in properties that they see the cash flow coming in every month and they assume it's making them great money because of the amount of cash coming in. But they neglect to look at how much equity they've built up, which is what's driving that higher income. They forget to think about the lower basis that they're getting for depreciation because they bought the property so cheap. There's just so many things that you have to be looking at to try to maximize your return from every dollar you have in a rental property. So what does appreciation look like? This is kind of an example of a $200,000 home and how it looks over a 4-year period. So we've got 2 years here assuming 10%, which this year we're pretty much on track to see that nationwide average. So year 1, that 200,000 home goes up to 220. Year 2, it goes up to 242. Assuming appreciation slows and we see a couple years at 5%, we go to 254, 100, and then finally 266, 805. And so even in slow depreciation with years 3 and 4, even if I were to take these down to 3, you're still at the point by year 6 that you can buy 2 homes. And so that's where this kind of 2 to 6 year model comes from. It's this process of how long does it take for the equity in one home to turn into 2 homes where we can 1031 or cash out and keep going and build that portfolio with the initial cash investment. And so this is one of the things that we talk about when we're looking at cash flowing and appreciating markets. You can't do that in a linear market. If you have a market where values are stagnant or values go down, you can't do that. If you have a market that's growing and going up in value, that's going to be a lot more valuable than cash flow in general. And so very important that when you look at a market, you look at historically what they've been doing from a value and other perspective. So very important, I recommend updating your return quarterly, all of your tracking, and using a cash on cash calculation method and basis to do that. So cash on cash, again, lets you look at how much money you're making on the cash that you've actually put out, not just the cash flow of that property on a monthly or yearly basis. So then you can look at properties deal to deal, and you can actually look at financing considered. You can look at original purchase price considered, so what your basis is based off of, versus, if you have a home that you bought for 120 that's now worth 220, you're not depreciating on that 220. And so if you were to go buy a new home at 220, you're actually going to gain almost double the depreciation. And so those are the types of things we're talking about here. So the goal is to be buying properties based on the overall big picture, not just kind of your upfront numbers or that rent ratio relative to your original purchase price. So when we have a property with a lot of equity capture, or a property that's been appreciating a lot, like, market like North Texas that's gone up, 100%, those are the things that we want to be looking at. So again, why we use equity and not the original down payment is because all equity, not just from down payment, but also principal pay down, appreciation, all of that is money you have in the property that could be used upon sale and is tied up in that property. So typically your return is going to drop every year. And if your equity doubles, so if you have 20% down payment, that turns into 40%, usually your return cuts almost in half from a cash on cash standpoint. And that's a huge difference. So just as a quick refresher, how we calculate that cash on cash return is the yearly net income divided by the equity. Very, very simple to use cash on cash, and it works anytime you're looking at a deal. And the great thing is you're using yearly net income divided by equity, so whatever type of financing you're considering for that particular deal is taken into consideration, unlike a cap rate. So here's an example. We have a property we purchased at 220. And this property originally rented at 1675. So you can see here, looking at this pro forma, basically your cash on cash return on this property was 5.44%. And including principal pay down, we're about 11.34%. And so after this property's gone up in value to 275, and that's just a 25% increase over 5 years. Even assuming the rents go up significantly to 1900, we're going to assume insurance and taxes only increase at 25% plus the principal pay down for the 5-year period. Even in this scenario where rent has gone up significantly and your increased expenses are not that much more, we're still at a cash on cash return now of 3.34 versus 5.44. So we've lost just over 2%. And in addition to that, including principal pay down, we're now at 6.2% instead of 11.34%, because again, your value's gone up, but the amount of principal you're paying is really virtually unchanged. It continues to go up every month as the loan matures, but it's not taking into consideration the higher valuation. And so this is where we really see the almost 6% difference in a property after a few years of ownership. And so again, you've virtually cut this return almost in half. And, so that's just something to keep in mind. And this is why the 2 to 6 year model is so important to building a portfolio. So what happens when we take that one property and we turn it into two with that same equity? So we're going to calculate apples to apples using that same original cash that you've put into that deal. And so when we look at this, what we're looking at is two properties instead. We're looking at a purchase price of 220,000 times two, rents at 1675 times two. We've got a 10.88% cash on cash return now, because again, we have only our initial equity considered in this position. And then we've got, including principal pay down, 21.76%. And so that's before all the extra benefits of the second property, right? Your depreciation, your net worth increase, your differences in cash flow, your differences in principal payment are only one piece of that. And that's also before we consider a reduced property tax period on new construction, if there is one. So essentially double your initial purchase. And so this is how, instead of cutting your return in half, you actually double your return based on that initial equity. Now, the one caveat I want to say here is note that I'm using initial equity for my figures here. In reality, when you run this, you're going to run it with all of the equity you have in these deals that you've now built up. But when we're looking to try to compare how the two return, this is the difference. And so this is how you make a lot more by going back into two properties on those four facets that we talk about. Now, think about it this way as well. We now have, instead of a $275,000 home, we have homes valued at $440,000. So if we have a 10% appreciation year, instead of gaining $27,500 in equity, you're gaining $44,000 in equity. So as you have more properties, the appreciation exponentially increases as well. So you have two options. You've got this property, it's cash flowing, you've got all that. Now we've got these two options. We either have to cash out, or we have to sell and do a 1031 exchange. And so this is what we have to look at now and decide, well, how do we know which one to do? And so this is a question people ask me all the time. How do I know whether it's time to 1031 or whether I should cash out? There are two questions to ask yourself, and that is how you're going to decide whether to cash out or 1031 exchange. Number one is, does it cash flow better than a new purchase with a cash out? So if with a cash out, your property doesn't cash flow, which if it's gone up way high in value, it's outside that kind of parameter of what we recommend to purchase, the answer is going to be no, it's not going to cash flow. And then number two is going to be, is this a property you would buy again right now for a rental property? So if this is a property you would buy today that still works as a rental, that you would be excited to purchase, then that's a great opportunity. But if it's a property that wouldn't work as a rental if you were looking to buy it at this moment, then that's not a property I would cash out. That's a property I would 1031. So generally, we say a 1031 makes more sense if you've owned it more than a few years in an appreciating market. Rents are rising or going up at a lower percentage than appreciation. And in times of very high appreciation, this is often the case. It's usually half or less. Property values over 275 in outer suburbs, over 310 in inner suburbs. Rents are less than 0.65% of value. Refinance rates are over 6% interest. And it's been more than 4 years since new build or last remodel. So these are kind of those metrics I use whenever I'm looking at a property to decide what to do. So why does a 1031 typically make more sense? Number one, because rents often increase at a slower rate than value in a market that's appreciating. You have a lot of reduced property tax benefits at the beginning of a property new construction that was not completed in January of that year, and often it takes them many years to catch up because they don't have sale data. And so you can often get, especially in infill property, this kind of reduced property tax benefit. So the preference is always to be in the cheapest property that you can. Those smaller dollar amount properties tend to perform better and have higher percentages of growth. There's also a bigger shortage, a bigger need for those properties. You're competing with more home buyers because you're also attracting apartment tenants. And then of course, the repairs. And so as those warranties run out, these are things that you want to be thinking about. So ultimately for me, using 1031 exchanges is typically the preference until you reach enough income and you have enough properties. Like if you're in my situation, it's not feasible to 1031 every property. You can't, because you can't identify enough replacements. But that's a future problem when you're in a very different point most of the time. So you want to use those appreciation gains to build your portfolio, and then use the existing cash and reserves that you have to continue acquiring when markets are down. And also use that for opportunities as they come up when the market's really hot. And that basically means staying in the lowest price point that you can, about 300,000 or less per unit. When we're dealing in multifamily, typically we're going to see closer to 220 to 240 per unit. When you're buying in a really hot market, you want to make sure you're looking and only buying properties with a purpose. So you want an area that's having extreme growth, redevelopment, lots of jobs coming in, housing shortage, people that are transitioning to that area with higher paying jobs, basically everything that I talk about with Sherman, but that's really what we're looking for. So you want to be lower price point than the average home in the area. So like going back to what we're looking at, when we're dealing in Sherman, we're dealing in 230 to 270, and the average price point right now is 315 plus. And so that's the type of metric that we're looking for. And then going back into the benefits of doubling, so we've doubled our depreciation, we've doubled our principal payments, we've doubled the assets that we own, we've diversified our risk, and we've increased our appreciation potential. And this is just some of the benefits. This is not even all inclusive. So again, 4 to 5 times the tax benefits, 4 to 5 times the appreciation. Of course, it's 4 to 5 depending on how much money you put down, right? So if we have a property and we cash out or we sell or whatever we do, we may have put 20% down on that property. We may put 25% down on the next. So if you use the same amount of money, that's the difference between 4 properties and 5 properties. And so when we talk about the benefit of financing over owning in cash, that's kind of where this 4 to 5 times comes in. And right now you might be putting 30% down, so it might be 3 to 3.5 times. And so this is really interest rate and down payment dependent. But the bottom line is that the more properties you own, the more these things are going to increase. Is that we can cash out. And so let's use those same numbers that we were looking at earlier from our assumptions. And at the end of year 2, we said our new value was 266,584.50. So our new amount of equity is 98,584.50. So if we were to cash out at 80%, that means that we have a potential for a loan amount at 213,267.60. We would then have to pay off our old loan amount of 168. Now I'm not including the closing costs because that's really been included by principal pay down. That's going to cover that. So this new amount that we have that we can take out on this cash out is just over $45,000. And so that is the proceeds in 2 years that we can take to go buy another $200,000 home with 20% down and keep that original property. And so that's how we take that original equity that's built up, 1031 exchange or cash out, again, those 2 options. In this case, we're cashing out and use it to go buy 2 for the one that we started with. Now, keep in mind that the property is now more expensive. The systems are 2 years older. The taxes are higher. So it may or may not make sense, but that is the cash out option. Now we're going to look at option 2, which is to do a 1031 exchange. So using those same numbers, our new value just over 266, equity just over 98.5. We're going to assume a sales price at that 266,584.50. And then because closing costs on this are a little bit higher, even though we have principal pay down, I've added another 4% in there as a cost. And so let's assume a net at closing of about 255,921 and some change. So that minus our 168 loan amount, that's going to be a net of just over 87,900. So in this case, you have just almost about 44,000 each for 2 properties. That's a little bit less than the 45,267.60 on cash out for 1 property, but you could go buy a cheaper property than the one that you sold that you would have otherwise held on to. Take advantage of the benefits of a new property, taxes, insurance, warranties, etc. And you're going to have, again, that little bit higher basis because you're going to have bought a little more expensive property than what you started with. So there's less costs on the model where you cash out, but again, that property has to still work as a rental property. And of course, that doesn't take into consideration that the cash flow might be higher on the brand new property because of all those things that we talked about. So again, I would love to tell you that I have the crystal ball for every property and what makes the most sense, but in reality, it's really a case-by-case situation and looking at the specific numbers, the specific information, the history of that property, and how it's cash flowing. Because at the end of the day, the metric to me that matters the most is, would you buy it again today as a rental property? If push comes to shove and my feet are to the fire, if it's a property I would buy again, I'm typically going to cash it out. If it's not a property that makes sense as a rental and it's not a property I would buy again, or if I bought it so super cheap that my tax benefits because the basis is so low are so off, like I bought it for 130 and it's now worth 230, that's when I'm going to 1031 exchange. I do want to remind you that I do provide consultations. They last anywhere from about 20 to 40 minutes. They cost, I think, 125. If that's something that you're interested in, you can scan this QR or you can contact Allie at info@slaughterinvesting.com. What we do is we go through portfolios, we go through what you're looking for, what your goals are, what you've been doing. Maybe you have a property you don't know what to do with. Maybe you don't know how to build your kind of investment model. And so there'll be a lot of information you'll send up front that I review before those calls. If you're kind of on the fence, you don't really know what to do next, you feel like you're stuck or you feel like you're overwhelmed, these are a great way to kind of come up with a plan and get a sense of security and decision making and what to do with different properties. Sometimes we have people that, they have a problem child property and they're not really sure what to do with it. So consults can be for any variety of reasons, but one of the reasons I do these is because so many people have a unique situation and just not everything can be covered in every webinar that we do. So I thank you so much for watching. We've got a great, robust schedule coming up of classes and live events. Can't wait to see everybody there. If I don't see you beforehand or you don't hear me beforehand, I hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving, and I thank you so much for listening. Take care.